Good morning and welcome back. We are on day 309 of our 365 days of Bible study. At the moment we're looking at Jesus as he appears in those bits of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which they copied from the missing document Q. We're having a brief look at this, and we're looking today at the Beatitudes at Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 12. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up onto the mountain. Once he had taken his seat, his disciples gathered round. Then he opened his mouth to teach them like this. The poor in spirit are happy because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Mourners are happy because they will be comforted. Humble people are happy. They will inherit the earth. People who are hungry and thirsty to see justice prevail are happy. They will be satisfied. Merciful people are happy. They will get mercy for themselves. The pure in heart are happy because they will see God. Peacemakers are happy because they will be called God's children. People who are persecuted because they are good, they are happy because the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. You are happy too. When people despise you and persecute you and say all kinds of untrue and evil things about you because of me. Rejoice and be glad. Your reward will be great in heaven because they persecuted the prophets who came before you in exactly the same way. In the story of the temptation of Christ, we saw a very clear example of how Matthew and Luke were copying from the same or very similar editions of the missing book called Q. Here in the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6 and 7 of St. Matthew, Matthew has gathered together sayings of Jesus from Q that in Luke are scattered all over the place, in Luke chapters 6, 11 to 14 and 16. And many of these are, once again, almost word-for-word copies, but when we look at the Beatitudes here, and in Luke 6, verses 20 to 23, and when we look at the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, 9 to 15, and Luke 11 to 24, there are interesting differences. We looked at the Our Father back on day 224, if you need to remind yourself of the differences there. Luke appears to have a simpler and less liturgical version of the prayer than Matthew does. And the same appears to be true of the Beatitudes. Luke's version is shorter, including only the poor, not poor in spirit, the hungry, not hungry for righteousness, and those who weep. He then quotes almost the same words as Matthew in the two verses that begin, "You are happy too when people despise you and persecute you." Then Luke adds another 3 verses that appear nowhere else in the Gospels. Did Matthew edit this out when he copied Q, or is this something only Luke knew about? It is the so-called woes. But woe to you who are rich, who have received already the consolation you're going to get. Woe to you that are laughing now, you are going to be mourning and weeping. Woe to you when everyone says good things about you. That's exactly what their ancestors did to the fake prophets. My personal opinion is that it meant an awful lot to Matthew to present his material in blocks that could be used by people who were teaching the gospel to newcomers, and to add the odd word or two to clarify the meaning, especially for his Jewish readers. That's why his version looks fuller and more polished. I believe that here in the Beatitudes and in the Lord's Prayer, that Luke has preserved for us Q's less polished and more primitive original. But that's just my own opinion. Undoubtedly, Matthew's version of the Beatitudes is a poetic creation, designed to be memorized and either repeated or sung. It forms a beautiful and memorable prelude to these 3 chapters of teaching that Matthew has gathered together, largely from his own personal sources and from Q. And the Sermon on the Mount remains a superb teaching aid, even in the present day. Tomorrow, I'll present you with just one more example from this lost book called Q by the scholars, before we look at the unique contributions that Matthew and Luke each make to their own Gospels. I'll see you then.